I pulled into the employee parking lot of the St. Paul Distribution Center at exactly 10 o'clock at night. The building was massive, like seriously huge, stretching across the landscape like its own small city. When I'd applied for the night shift position, I hadn't quite understood just how big the place would be. The online listing had just mentioned competitive pay for overnight work, which was all I needed to hear with my student loans piling up. The main entrance was lit by harsh fluorescent tubes that buzzed and flickered, casting weird shadows across the empty reception area. My footsteps sounded too loud as I walked through the door, like I was interrupting something. A laminated sign pointed down a hallway. Night shift check-in. The break room was basic. Beige walls, a couple of tables, a microwave that looked older than me, and a fridge covered in passive-aggressive notes about stolen lunches. I dropped my backpack on one of the chairs and checked my phone. 10:12. My shift officially started at 10:30, giving me just enough time to get my bearings. I headed back out to find someone who could tell me what I was supposed to do. The corridors branched off in multiple directions, and I started to wonder if I should have brought breadcrumbs to find my way back. Then I saw him, a thin guy standing near what looked like a time clock, glancing around nervously. "Hey," I called out. "I'm Tyler, new guy, starting tonight." The man turned, his gaze darting to meet mine before quickly scanning the hallway behind me. He had the most nervous eyes I'd ever seen, constantly moving like he expected something to jump out at any second. "Hayden Miller," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Night supervisor." He didn't offer to shake hands, which was fine by me. Up close, I could see just how thin he was. Not just slim, but gaunt, like someone who'd forgotten to eat regularly for months. The fluorescent lights did him no favors, highlighting the dark circles under his eyes. 3 years on nights?" I asked, trying to make conversation. He nodded, still not quite looking at me directly. 3 years, 2 months, 11 days. The oddly specific answer made me pause. Who counted days at a job like that? "Come on," Hayden said, gesturing for me to follow him. "I'll show you the floor before your shift starts." We walked through a set of double doors, and suddenly, the scale of the place hit me all at once. The warehouse stretched out so far I couldn't see the back wall. Steel shelving units rose up at least 5 stories high, filled with everything from small electronics to furniture. The ceiling was a maze of pipes, ducts, and more fluorescent lighting, much of which flickered or buzzed like they were communicating in some secret code. "We fulfill orders for the online division," Hayden explained, his voice still quiet. "You'll get assigned sections each night. Pick the items, send them to shipping." I nodded, trying to take it all in. The building felt wrong somehow. Too big, too empty, too quiet except for the constant hum of machinery and those flickering lights creating pools of shadow between the shelves. Hayden stopped abruptly and turned to me. His hands were shaking slightly as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was wrinkled, like it had been handled many times, with creases worn soft from repeated folding and unfolding. "People have died here," he whispered, his eyes darting around the empty warehouse. The way he said it, flat, matter-of-fact, sent a chill through me. I started to laugh, but the sound died in my throat when I saw his expression. He wasn't joking. He pushed the paper into my hand. "Follow these exactly or you won't make it to morning." I unfolded the paper. On it were 5 handwritten rules. 1. Avoid the woman in the red dress on the 3rd floor. 2. Ignore the man in the yellow hat no matter what he asks. 3. Don't search for the crying child. 4. If you see the man in the blue suit, hide immediately. 5. Never interfere with the 5th floor lights. I read them twice, then looked up at Hayden with what must have been obvious disbelief. "Is this some kind of joke? Hazing the new guy?" Hayden's face tightened. "You think I'd joke about this?" He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in with surprising strength. "Listen to me. These rules keep you alive." I pulled my arm free. "Okay, calm down. Tell me what's going on." Hayden's eyes kept scanning our surroundings as he spoke, never staying still for more than a second. "The woman in the red dress looks normal at first. She'll wave to you, try to get your attention. If you acknowledge her, wave back, nod, even look her in the eye too long, she'll hunt you through the building." "Hunt me?" I repeated. "Martinez waved to her last summer. We found his badge by the loading dock, never found him." Hayden's voice cracked slightly. "The man in the yellow hat will ask for help finding something. He looks like a normal customer. He's not. No matter what he says, don't respond. Don't help him. I stared at the paper, then back at Hayden. This had to be a prank. Some twisted initiation for the new guy, but the fear in Hayden's eyes seemed genuine. The crying child, he continued, his voice dropping even lower. You'll hear it sometimes, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning. It sounds like a lost kid. It's not. Don't look for it. Don't try to help. What about the man in blue suit? I asked, playing along despite my skepticism. Hayden's whole body tensed. If you see him, run. Find somewhere small to hide, under a shelf, in a supply closet. Stay completely still. Don't make a sound. Don't come out until you're sure he's gone. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. And the 5th floor lights? Hayden pointed upward. I followed his gaze to the top level of the warehouse. Unlike the rest of the building with its dim, flickering lights, the 5th floor blazed with brightness, every light on, creating a ceiling of white glow. Whatever you do, Hayden whispered, don't ever go up there. I wanted to ask why, but something in his expression stopped me. His fear was too raw, too real. Either this was the most elaborate hazing prank I'd ever seen, or something was seriously wrong with this place. Your shift starts in 5 minutes, Hayden said, checking his watch. Stay on the 1st and 2nd floors tonight. I'll be around if you need help, but remember the rules. He walked away, his thin shoulders hunched forward like he was carrying a heavy weight. I stood there, surrounded by towering shelves and flickering lights, holding a paper with 5 rules that made no sense. Part of me wanted to walk out right then, but the thought of my empty bank account and mounting bills kept my feet planted. It was probably just a stupid prank. Every workplace had its weird traditions, right? I took out the paper and read the rules one more time, then tucked it back into my pocket. Whatever game they were playing, I could handle it for 8 hours. The money was too good to pass up. I headed toward the time clock to officially start my shift, trying to ignore the growing unease in my stomach. Above me, the lights of the 5th floor burned steadily while the rest of the warehouse fell into periods of darkness as bulbs flickered and died. I pushed my cart down the main aisle of the warehouse, the wheels squeaking against the concrete floor. 20 minutes into my shift, and I was already sweating. The online order list in my hand was simple enough. Grab items from specific shelves, scan them, put them in the cart. But the massive scale of the building made each retrieval feel like a small expedition. With Hayden gone, the warehouse felt completely different. The empty spaces between the towering shelves seemed to swallow sound in weird ways. Sometimes my footsteps would echo back at me from unexpected directions, making it sound like someone was walking parallel to my path. Other times, the building would go so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I checked the first item on my list, a wireless speaker from aisle 14, Section B, on the 2nd floor. As I navigated toward the stairwell, I kept glancing over my shoulder. Shadows seemed to flicker and shift just at the edge of my vision, but whenever I turned to look directly, nothing was there. Just tricks of the light, I told myself. Just my brain trying to make sense of this weird place. The 2nd floor was laid out almost identically to the 1st, but with narrower aisles and taller shelves. My footsteps sounded hollow on the metal walkway as I counted down the aisle numbers. 12, 13, 14, I muttered, turning into aisle 14 and scanning the shelf labels for Section B. I found the wireless speakers stacked neatly in their boxes and checked the SKU number against my list. After confirming it was the right item, I scanned it with the handheld device and placed it carefully in my cart. 1 down, 17 to go. The next few items were all on the 2nd floor, scattered across different aisles. I worked methodically, trying to focus only on the task at hand and not on the unnatural stillness of the building or the way the lights kept buzzing and flickering overhead. I was reaching for a small kitchen appliance on a high shelf when it happened. I stretched up on my toes, fingers straining toward the box, when my balance shifted slightly. To steady myself, I grabbed the shelf with my free hand and automatically glanced upward. That's when I saw her. She stood on the 3rd floor walkway, directly above me, leaning casually against the railing. A woman in a flowing red dress that seemed too formal, too elegant for a warehouse at nearly 11 at night. Her dark hair was styled in perfect waves that framed her face, and she wore makeup that looked fresh and flawless despite the late hour. At first glance, she looked completely normal, like a corporate visitor or maybe a lost customer who had somehow wandered into the building after hours. She smiled warmly when our eyes met, her red lips curving upward in a friendly greeting. Then she raised her hand and waved at me, the gesture casual and inviting. Without thinking, I felt my own hand start to lift in response. It was pure social reflex. Someone waves, you wave back. My arm was already halfway up when Hayden's warning crashed through my mind. Avoid the woman in the red dress on the 3rd floor. My hand froze in midair. A cold sweat broke out across my back as I realized what I'd almost done. I forced my arm back down to my side, my fingers curling into a tight fist. Breaking eye contact, I stared intently at my order list, pretending to be completely absorbed in the inventory numbers. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had I already messed up? Did eye contact count as acknowledging her? I kept my gaze firmly fixed on the paper, counting my breaths to steady myself. After what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. I needed to know if she was still there. Slowly, trying to make it look like I was just casually scanning my surroundings, I glanced back up toward the 3rd floor railing. She was still there, but everything about her had changed. The warm smile was gone, replaced by a snarl that twisted her face into something barely human. Her lips were pulled back, showing too many teeth, and her eyes, God, her eyes, burned with such intense hatred that I physically recoiled. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the railing, the tendons in her hands standing out like cables under her skin. She looked like she wanted to vault over the barrier and tear me apart with her bare hands. I abandoned the item I'd been reaching for. Grabbing my cart, I turned it around so quickly that one of the wheels left the ground. I started walking, then speed walking, then practically running toward the nearest stairwell, trying to put as much distance as possible between me and the woman in red. Behind and above me, I heard it, the rapid click of heels on metal. She was moving, following me. The footsteps were fast, too fast to be normal. They didn't sound like someone walking or even running, more like an animal galloping on 4 limbs. I shoved my cart through the stairwell door, not caring about the noise it made as it banged against the wall. The footsteps were getting closer, the metallic clicks echoing through the cavernous space of the warehouse. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling in my haste to get back to the 1st floor. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard the footsteps reach the stairwell entrance on the 3rd floor. And then, nothing. The clicking stopped abruptly, cutting off mid-step as if she'd hit an invisible wall. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps, waiting for the sound to resume. But the stairwell remained silent except for the distant hum of the warehouse machinery and my own thundering heartbeat. Hayden's warning had been accurate. She couldn't follow me down the stairs. Whatever she was bound to the 3rd floor, just as he'd said. I leaned against the wall, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't a prank or a hazing ritual. The pure hatred in that woman's face had been real, and no coworker playing a joke could have moved with that unnatural speed. The rules were real, all of them. I pulled the crumpled paper from my pocket and read through the remaining warnings with new respect and fear. If the woman in the red dress was real, then so was the man in the yellow hat, and the crying child, and the man in the blue suit. I took several deep breaths, straightened my shoulders, and pushed my cart out of the stairwell. I still had orders to fill, and now I understood exactly why the pay for this job was so good. No one had told me it would be easy to earn. They'd only told me what I needed to do to survive. I spent the next hour trying to slow my heart rate. What had just happened with the woman in red wasn't something I could rationalize away. The hatred in her eyes, that inhuman movement, the memory made my hands shake as I pushed my cart back toward the 1st floor inventory section. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face transforming from that pleasant smile to that snarling, predatory expression. I decided to stick to the 1st floor for a while, focusing on restocking returned items that had been processed earlier in the day. The task was straightforward. Check each item for damage, scan it back into inventory, and place it in its designated spot. The mindless work helped calm my nerves. I kept the crumpled paper with the rules in my pocket, occasionally touching it like a talisman. The 1st floor seemed safer somehow. The ceiling wasn't as high, the lights were more consistent, and there were fewer shadowy corners where things could hide. I'd just finished placing a blender back on its shelf when I noticed him. A man in a bright yellow baseball cap was pushing a shopping cart through the aisle perpendicular to mine. He moved with the casual confidence of a regular customer, pausing occasionally to examine items on the shelves. He wore jeans and a simple polo shirt, completely ordinary in every way except for his presence in a closed warehouse at nearly midnight. The second rule flashed in my mind: ignore the man in the yellow hat, no matter what he asks. I quickly looked down at my clipboard, pretending to be absorbed in the inventory list. From the corner of my eye, I watched as the man turned his cart and began heading directly toward me. My stomach tightened. He stopped his cart at the end of my aisle and began walking toward me. I kept my eyes fixed on my clipboard, counting items that didn't need counting. "Excuse me," the man called out, his voice friendly and completely normal. "Could you help me find something?" I didn't look up. I didn't respond. I just kept checking boxes on my inventory sheet, my pen pressing too hard against the paper. The man came closer. "Hello? I'm looking for the smart speakers. Could you point me in the right direction?" I turned away and began walking toward the other end of the aisle, scanning item tags I'd already verified. His footsteps followed behind me. "Sir? I know you can hear me. I just need a little help finding what I'm looking for." The natural instinct to respond, to turn around and help, was almost overwhelming. Every social norm I'd learned since childhood screamed at me to acknowledge him, to provide assistance, but Hayden's warnings rang louder. I moved to the next aisle, pushing my cart a bit faster. The man followed, his pace quickening to match mine. "Excuse me," he said again, his tone still pleasant but with a new edge underneath. "I really need assistance here. It would only take a moment of your time." My heart hammered in my chest. I reached the end of the aisle and turned right, heading toward electronics, where I had more items to restock. The man stayed with me. "All I need is directions to the automotive section. Can you at least point me that way?" I gripped the handle of my cart tighter, my knuckles turning white. The urge to turn around, to tell this seemingly normal person that the store was closed, that he shouldn't be here, pressed against my resolve. "It's very rude to ignore customers," the man said, his voice growing sharper, colder. "Your manager will hear about this." I focused on breathing evenly, on keeping my pace steady. Not too fast to show fear, but not slow enough to let him catch up completely. "I know you can hear me," he insisted, closer now. I could feel his presence just behind my shoulder. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. His voice had changed again, still using the same words, still asking for help, but with something underneath that wasn't human at all. A vibration, a resonance that made my teeth ache. "All I want is for you to look at me," he said, his voice suddenly directly beside my ear despite my continued movement. "Just turn around, see me, help me find what I'm looking for." I didn't break stride. I didn't turn. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead, feeling cold sweat beating on my forehead. For what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, I continued my work while the man followed me. His requests cycled from polite to demanding to something that sounded like pleading but wasn't quite right. The words were convincing, but the tone behind them felt hollow, practiced, like something mimicking human emotion without understanding it. As I turned down aisle 22, I glanced quickly to my right, unable to resist checking if he was still there. The aisle was empty. I looked back over my shoulder. No sign of the man in the yellow hat. I paused, my cart halfway down the aisle, listening intently. Nothing but the distant hum of the warehouse machinery. He was gone, vanished between one aisle and the next. My legs nearly buckled with relief. I leaned against my cart, breathing deeply, allowing myself a moment to recover. The encounter had left me drained, as if I'd been running for miles rather than simply walking through the warehouse. I continued restocking, moving through electronics and then toward home goods, constantly scanning my surroundings. Every shadow, every reflection in the metal shelving made me tense, expecting to see the yellow hat again. That's when I heard it. A child crying. The sound was distant but clear, the unmistakable sobs of a young child echoing through the cavernous space of the warehouse. It came from somewhere to my left, maybe 2 or 3 aisles over. The crying pulled at something primal inside me. It sounded so genuinely distressed, so small and frightened, that my body automatically turned toward it before my mind could process what was happening. Don't search for the crying child. The third rule. I froze in place, fighting every natural instinct that told me to go help, to find this lost and frightened child. The crying continued, punctuated by little hiccuping sobs that sounded so authentic it made my chest ache. What if it was real? What if somehow, against all logic, an actual child had wandered into the warehouse? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled paper, reading Rule 3 again. Hayden had been explicit. Don't search for it. Don't try to help. The woman in red had been real. The man in the yellow hat had been real. This wasn't real either. The crying grew louder, more desperate. It seemed to be moving, getting closer, then further away, as if the child was wandering through the aisles searching for help. I gripped the rules paper tightly and deliberately turned my cart in the opposite direction, away from the sound. Each step felt wrong, like I was violating some fundamental part of being human. The crying followed me, somehow managing to always sound like it was coming from just a few aisles away, no matter which direction I went. I focused on my breathing, on the squeak of the cart wheels against the concrete floor, on the inventory list that still needed to be completed. Anything to drown out those heartbreaking sobs. Eventually, after what might have been 20 minutes of this psychological torture, the crying faded. I found myself in the furniture section, surrounded by boxed chairs and tables, the silence almost as unsettling as the sobs had been. I checked my watch. It was only 1 a.m, 7 more hours to go in my shift, and I'd already encountered 3 of the 5 things on the rules list. The warehouse stretched around me, massive and mostly dark. Somewhere above, the 5th floor blazed with light, the only fully illuminated section of the building. I stared up at it, wondering what exactly those lights were protecting us from, or what they were keeping contained. I returned to my cart and my clipboard, continuing my work with a new vigilance. The rules had saved me twice more tonight. I wouldn't question them again. I kept my head down for the next several hours, determined to focus solely on my tasks and avoid any more encounters. The weight of the rules paper in my pocket felt like a lifeline. 3 strange encounters in one night had left me mentally exhausted, but I still had half a shift to go. By 4 a.m, the warehouse had settled into an eerie quiet. The distant machinery hum had become white noise, and my own footsteps seemed muffled against the concrete floor. I'd been assigned to process returned items, checking for damage before returning them to inventory. The mindless work helped steady my nerves as I pushed my cart through the dimly lit aisles. The electronics section was particularly dark, with only every 3rd overhead light functioning. I scanned a returned wireless speaker and placed it back on the shelf, then checked my list for the next item. That's when I felt it, a subtle shift in the air. The warehouse was vast, but suddenly it felt smaller, as if the space had contracted around me. I glanced up from my clipboard. Between 2 tall shelving units about 30 feet away stood a man. He wore a navy blue business suit that looked expensive, the kind with perfect tailoring that suggested custom work rather than off the rack. His shoes were so well polished they caught what little light there was, gleaming against the concrete floor. His posture was unnaturally straight, his arms hanging perfectly still at his sides. What struck me most wasn't his presence at this hour, but the deliberate way he moved. Each step was measured, precise, his polished shoes clicking against the floor in a steady rhythm that seemed almost mechanical. I froze, clipboard still in hand, as the man turned his head toward me with an unhurried motion. When our eyes met, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't even a human smile. His lips curled upward at the corners, revealing teeth that were too white and too perfect. The expression never reached his eyes, which remained cold and calculating. It was the look of a predator that had just spotted something it intended to hunt. The 4th rule crashed through my mind with crystal clarity. Hide immediately if you see the man in the blue suit. I watched in horror as he altered his course, turning to walk directly toward me. His pace didn't increase. He didn't need to hurry. The smile remained fixed on his face as he approached, each footstep an even, measured click against the floor. My muscles unlocked. I dropped the clipboard, abandoned my cart, and ran. I sprinted down the aisle, turned left at the intersection, and raced toward the back of the warehouse. Behind me, I heard the clicking of those polished shoes continue at the same steady pace, not rushing, not hurrying, just continuing with that same mechanical precision. I glanced back over my shoulder. The man wasn't running. He was still walking at that same measured pace, but somehow he wasn't falling behind. The distance between us remained exactly the same despite my full sprint. That's when true panic set in. I ran faster than I'd ever moved before, my lungs burning as I pushed myself forward. I needed to hide, to find somewhere small enough to conceal myself completely. The clicking footsteps maintained their rhythm, not gaining, not falling back, always the same distance behind me. I dodged between shelving units, knocked over an empty pallet in my path, and skidded around a corner. The back area of the warehouse contained larger storage shelves for bulk items, with the bottom shelves raised about 8 inches off the floor. The footsteps continued behind me. Click, 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 maintaining that perfect rhythm. I couldn't outrun him. I needed to hide. I spotted a gap beneath one of the massive storage shelves where a shadow pooled on the concrete. Without hesitation, I dove toward it, rolling onto my stomach and scrambling underneath. The space was tight, barely enough room for my body, with rough concrete scraping against my chest and back as I pressed myself flat. I pulled my limbs in close, trying to make myself as small as possible. The shelf above me was loaded with heavy boxes and dust tickled my nose. I held my breath to keep from sneezing, my heart hammering so hard I was certain it would give me away. The clicking footsteps slowed and then stopped. Through the narrow gap, I could see those polished shoes at eye level, just inches from my hiding spot. They pivoted slowly, turning in a full circle, before stopping again, facing directly toward the shelf I was under. The man crouched down, his blue pant legs folded with crisp creases, and his manicured hand came to rest on the concrete. I could see part of his face now, that same horrible smile, but with an intensity in his eyes that made my skin crawl. He tilted his head to peer into the darkness beneath the shelf, searching methodically. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I kept my eyes open despite the dust because I was afraid the sound of blinking might somehow alert him. His face was inches from mine, separated only by shadow and the edge of the shelf. I could see a perfect Windsor knot in his tie, not a single wrinkle in his collar. He looked immaculate, like he'd just stepped out of a boardroom rather than walking through a dusty warehouse at 4 a.m. He remained crouched there, searching, for what felt like hours. My lungs burned with the need for oxygen. My muscles trembled from being held rigid and cold sweat soaked through my shirt. Finally, agonizingly, the man straightened. The polished shoes turned away from my hiding spot and began moving again, each step that same measured click against the concrete. I remained frozen, not daring to move even as the footsteps grew more distant. The clicking faded until I could no longer hear it. But still I stayed motionless, terrified that any movement would bring him back. I counted in my head, 1 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, each second an eternity as my body screamed for movement. Only after 20 full minutes of silence did I allow myself to take a careful, shallow breath. The air tasted like dust and terror. I remained under that shelf, every muscle locked in place, watching the empty aisle for any sign of those polished shoes returning. I remained under that shelf for what felt like hours, though my watch showed it had been 40 minutes since I'd last heard those methodical footsteps. My muscles had locked up from staying in the same position, and a dull pain throbbed through my shoulders and back. The concrete floor had leached all warmth from my body, leaving me chilled and stiff. The warehouse seemed quiet now, too quiet. I took a deep breath and slowly, painfully began to extract myself from beneath the shelf. My joints protested as I inched forward, dust clinging to my uniform. When I finally pulled myself free and stood up, my legs nearly buckled. I leaned against the metal shelving for support, trying to work feeling back into my limbs. The time on my watch read 5 a.m. Only an hour left in my shift. I'd survived this long by following the rules, and I just needed to make it 1 more hour. As I steadied myself, my eyes drifted upward. Through the gaps in the shelving units, I could see all the way to the ceiling of the warehouse, where the 5th floor was visible. Unlike the rest of the building with its patchy, flickering illumination, every light on the 5th floor blazed with steady, uninterrupted brightness. It was so intensely lit that it looked like daytime up there, a stark contrast to the dim, shadow-filled space where I stood. I hadn't really noticed the difference before. Sure, I'd seen that the 5th floor was brighter, but now the contrast seemed almost deliberate, like a barrier of light cutting through the darkness. My cart and clipboard were long gone, abandoned when I'd run from the man in the blue suit. I needed to find Hayden, or at least figure out what I should be doing for my final hour. Moving cautiously, I made my way through the warehouse, staying alert for any sign of unnatural movement or sound. The loading dock seemed like a logical place to look for my supervisor. This late in the shift, he might be preparing for the morning deliveries. I navigated through the maze of shelves, keeping my footsteps as quiet as possible while continuously scanning my surroundings. When I finally reached the loading dock area, I spotted Hayden. He was methodically moving boxes from a pallet to a nearby shelf, his movements careful and precise. He worked with his back to the wall, positioned to see anyone approaching. "Hayden," I said softly as I got closer. He jumped like he'd been shocked, dropping the small box he was holding. It clattered to the floor as he spun around, his eyes wide with fear until he registered who I was. "I survived," I whispered, not trusting my voice at normal volume in the cavernous space. Hayden's shoulders sagged, tension visibly flowing out of his body. "You saw him," he stated rather than asked, his voice barely audible. I nodded. "The man in the blue suit." I hid under a shelf. "Good," Hayden said, bending down to retrieve the fallen box. His hands shook slightly as he placed it on the shelf. "Most people don't make it past him." I glanced upward again toward that blazing 5th floor. The question had been building inside me all night, growing more urgent with each encounter. "The 5th floor," I said, pointing upward. "What's really up there?" Hayden's face went completely pale. He stopped what he was doing and glanced nervously toward the ceiling, like someone might be listening. "Those lights protect us," he said quietly, moving closer so I could hear his whispered words. "If they ever go out, everything down here becomes their hunting ground. The woman, the man in yellow, the blue suit. They're trapped as long as those lights stay on." The revelation sent a chill through me. I looked up again at that wall of light with new understanding. It wasn't just illumination, it was containment. "So that's why the 5th floor is off limits," I said. Hayden nodded. "Nobody goes up there except maintenance, and they only go during daylight hours with at least 3 people. The system has backups on backups. If the power fails, generators kick in automatically." He paused, looking around before continuing. "But sometimes the lights flicker. Just for a second, and that's when they can move more freely." This explained the constant vigilance, the rules, the fear that permeated the building. We weren't just working in a haunted warehouse. We were working beneath a prison for things that wanted us dead. "Why not just close the building?" I asked. Hayden gave me a look that suggested the question was naive. "You think the company would abandon a billion-dollar distribution center? Besides, where would they go? The lights keep them here. Remove the lights and they'd be free to go anywhere." The implication made my stomach turn. Better to have them contained and managed with a rule book than loose in the world. Hayden checked his watch. "Almost 6. Let's finish up." He handed me a list of items that needed to be verified before the morning shift arrived. I took the paper, grateful for the distraction. The task was simple enough. Check that specific high-value electronics were properly secured in their designated locations. I worked methodically, moving through the aisles with newfound purpose. Each time I glanced upward, those 5th floor lights seemed more meaningful, a barrier between safety and whatever lurked in the darkness. The final hour passed quickly as I focused on my task. The constant checking of inventory numbers kept my mind occupied and away from dwelling on the horrors I'd encountered. As I worked, I noticed subtle changes in the warehouse atmosphere. The air felt lighter somehow, as if morning was approaching even though we were deep inside the building with no windows. At 5 minutes to 6, I heard the first sounds of the morning shift arriving. Voices carried from the direction of the entrance. Normal, casual conversation that seemed almost shocking after a night of whispers and silence. I made my way back to the loading dock where several early morning workers were already preparing for the day's shipments. They moved with casual confidence, laughing and talking at normal volume. None of them showed the hypervigilance that characterized Hayden's movements. Did they not know? Or did whatever inhabited this place only appear at night? Hayden appeared beside me, his shoulders still tense despite the approaching end of our shift. "The daylight hours are normal," he said, seemingly reading my thoughts. "They know something's wrong with the place, but they don't see what we see." I nodded, understanding now the division between the two worlds that existed in this building: day and night, light and shadow, normal and nightmare. As 6 o'clock approached, I felt an overwhelming exhaustion crash over me. My body ached from the night's exertions and extended periods of frozen terror. Yet underneath the fatigue was something else, a grim sense of accomplishment. I had faced genuine horrors and survived by following the rules. I had proven myself capable of control and discipline in the face of terror. The morning supervisor arrived, a cheerful woman who greeted Hayden with friendly familiarity. She didn't seem to notice or care about his nervous demeanor or the shadows under his eyes. This was just another shift change to her. As the clock struck 6, I felt something change in the warehouse atmosphere. The woman in the red dress, the man in the yellow hat, the crying child, the man in the blue suit, their presence seemed to recede like shadows retreating before the dawn. The night was over. We had survived. And somehow, despite everything, I knew I would be back the next night. I clocked out at exactly 6 a.m., my fingers trembling so much that I had to try twice to position my card correctly in the time clock. The machine made a satisfying beep, officially ending my first night shift at the distribution center. My body felt heavy with exhaustion, but my mind remained wired and alert, still scanning for threats despite the growing normalcy around me as the morning shift workers filled the space. The break room looked different in the early morning light that streamed through its single small window. What had been an eerie, empty space last night now bustled with activity as day shift employees prepared for their workday, pouring coffee and chatting about ordinary things. I grabbed my backpack from the locker I'd been assigned, my movements mechanical as my brain struggled to process everything I'd experienced. The crumpled rules paper remained in my pocket. I patted it once more for reassurance before heading toward the exit. Hayden stood waiting by the main doors, his thin frame leaning against the wall. Even though the night had ended, his eyes continued their constant scanning, never settling in one place for more than a second. Dark circles beneath his eyes looked almost like bruises against his pale skin. He straightened up when he saw me approach. "Ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Together we pushed through the double doors and stepped outside. The cool morning air hit me like a physical shock after hours in the climate-controlled warehouse. The sky had that pre-dawn grayish-blue quality, with just enough light to see without the sun having fully risen. The parking lot contained only a few cars now, ours plus those of the early morning shift supervisors. We walked in silence until we reached the middle of the lot, where our paths would separate to our respective vehicles. "Most people quit after the first night," Hayden said, stopping between two empty parking spaces. His voice sounded rough from disuse. "The pay is good because they can't keep anyone." I turned to look back at the massive building. From the outside, it appeared completely ordinary, just another massive distribution center like thousands across the country. But now I knew what lived inside it, what hunted in its shadows. My eyes moved upward to the fifth-floor windows, which still blazed with light despite the growing daylight. Those lights weren't just for illumination. They were a cage, a barrier keeping horrors contained. "How long have those things been there?" I asked. Hayden shrugged. "Longer than the warehouse. The company built around them." He didn't elaborate further. I thought about my student loans, the rent due next week, and my nearly empty bank account. The starting pay for this position was almost double what I could make anywhere else with my qualifications. One night had earned me more than 2 days of work at my last job. But the money wasn't the only reason I was considering coming back. Something else had taken root inside me during those terrifying hours, a strange sense of accomplishment. I had faced genuine terror and survived through careful adherence to the rules. There was something almost addictive about that feeling, about knowing I had maintained control when everything inside me screamed to run. "I'll see you tonight," I told Hayden, the decision crystallizing as I spoke the words. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him before, a mixture of respect and concern. He nodded once, then turned toward his car without another word. I watched him walk away, his shoulders still hunched as if expecting something to drop on him from above. My own car sat at the far end of the lot where I'd parked it last night, when I had no idea what waited for me inside those walls. I walked toward it, keys gripped tightly in my hand, alert despite being outside in the growing daylight. Old habits from just hours ago already felt ingrained. As I drove home through the quiet St. Paul streets, my mind kept replaying each encounter from the night. The woman in the red dress with her inhuman snarl, the persistent man in the yellow hat whose voice had changed into something hollow and wrong, the heartbreaking cries of a child that wasn't really there, and most terrifying of all, the man in the blue suit with his mechanical movements and predatory smile. I already began mentally reviewing the rules, reciting them to myself as I drove. 1. Avoid the woman in the red dress on the 3rd floor. 2. Ignore the man in the yellow hat regardless of his requests. 3. Don't search for the crying child. 4. Hide immediately if you see the man in the blue suit. 5. Never interfere with the 5th floor lights. Simple rules, clear boundaries, the key to survival. Traffic lights changed automatically as I passed through mostly empty intersections. Early morning workers waited at bus stops. A few joggers ran along the sidewalks. The ordinary world continued, unaware of what existed in that warehouse. The distribution center had accepted me, tested me, and I had passed. Despite the horror of what I had experienced, or perhaps because of it, I found myself looking forward to proving I could survive another night. Each shift would make me stronger, more capable. Each encounter would test my resolve and self-control. The rules would keep me alive, and I would master them.